Before we begin, a quick and important disclaimer. The information provided in this video is for educational and entertainment purposes only and does not constitute legal, financial, or psychological professional advice. Divorce involves complex legal and personal considerations that vary significantly by jurisdiction and individual circumstances. You should conduct your own due diligence and consult with qualified professionals regarding your specific situation before making any decisions that could affect your legal rights or financial well-being. Every morning in the quiet, tree-lined cul-de-sacs of the American suburbs, thousands of families engage in a choreographed ritual. The garage doors hum as they open, the SUVs reverse down pristine driveways, and the children are dropped off at high-performing schools. From the outside, it looks like the ultimate realization of the American dream. But according to historical trends and sociological case studies, behind those neutral-tone siding panels and manicured lawns, a quiet epidemic is unfolding. In the United States, roughly every 36 seconds, a divorce is finalized. That is nearly 2,400 divorces per day. While urban centers and rural communities have their own challenges, the American suburb has become a unique pressure cooker for marital dissolution. We are currently witnessing a phenomenon where the very environment designed to foster family stability, the suburban enclave, is now often the setting for its most complex collapses. This is not just about individuals falling out of love. It is about the intersection of geography, economics, and the psychological weight of the picket fence ideal. If you have ever wondered why some of the most affluent zip codes in the country also exhibit some of the most volatile domestic patterns, you are looking at a masterclass in suburban sociology. By the end of this comprehensive study, you will understand the intricate mechanics behind the modern suburban divorce. We will explore the suburban paradox, where the pursuit of safety and status often leads to isolation and resentment. We will analyze the potential outcomes of the dual income trap, and how the specific architecture of suburban life, the lack of third places, and the reliance on the commuter lifestyle, creates a unique strain on the marital bond. Today, we are dismantling the myth of the perfect suburban union to reveal the data-driven reality of what happens when the dream becomes a burden. To understand the current state of divorce in the American suburbs, we must first look at the historical trends that built these communities. The suburbs were marketed in the post-World War II era as a sanctuary. Levittown and its successors promised a controlled environment where the chaos of the city was replaced by the predictability of the lawn. However, this predictability created a theater of the domestic. In suburban sociology, we often see the keeping up with the Joneses effect acting as a primary stressor. When your identity is tied to the outward manifestation of success, the renovation, the luxury vehicle, the elite travel sports league for the children, the marriage itself can become a secondary asset. Case studies from the last decade suggest that when a marriage is treated as a component of a brand rather than a partnership, the foundation becomes brittle. The pressure to maintain an image of perfection means that by the time a suburban couple seeks help, the rot has often reached the structural beams. Consider the role of the commuter marriage. In many high-density suburban areas surrounding hubs like New York City, Chicago, or Los Angeles, the professional demands on one or both spouses often result in what sociologists call functional single parenting. Historical data indicates that the second shift, the labor performed at home after the professional workday, is a major flashpoint for conflict. In the suburbs, where houses are larger and the logistics of child-rearing are more spread out, this labor is amplified. When one partner is commuting 3 hours a day to fund a lifestyle they barely have time to enjoy, and the other is managing the complex bureaucracy of suburban life in isolation, the shared experience of the marriage begins to erode. This is a potential outcome of the very layout of our towns. We have traded community density for private square footage, and that privacy often turns into a silo. Furthermore, we must address the gray divorce phenomenon, which has seen a significant rise in suburban demographics. Historically, divorce rates peaked in the early years of marriage, but recent trends show a doubling of divorce rates for those over the age of 50. In the suburbs, this often coincides with the empty nest transition. For 25 years, the marriage may have been held together by the centrifugal force of child-rearing and community involvement. Once the children leave for college, the couple is left in a 5-bedroom house with nothing but the silence of the suburbs. Without the third places found in urban environments, cafes, walkable squares, and diverse social hubs, these couples are forced to confront one another without the buffer of a busy schedule. This transition often reveals that the couple has drifted into two different lives while living under the same roof. The economic implications of suburban divorce are equally staggering and contribute to the open loop of why these cases are so high stakes. In a suburban context, a divorce isn't just the end of a relationship. It is the liquidation of a complex financial entity. The family home is often the primary asset, and in many affluent suburbs, the cost of maintaining that home is so high that neither party can afford it on a single income. This leads to the suburban displacement effect, where the dissolution of a marriage forces both parties out of the community they spent decades building. The potential outcomes of these financial splits are often more devastating in the suburbs than in urban areas because of the lack of middle-tier housing. You are either in the big house or you are out of the district entirely. We also have to look at the psychological concept of status inconsistency. In many suburban divorces, the fear of social contagion is a major factor. Data suggests that divorce can be contagious within a suburban social circle. When one couple in a tight-knit neighborhood or a school group separates, it often serves as a catalyst for others to reevaluate their own situations. It breaks the perfection spell. Suddenly, the option that seemed unthinkable becomes a visible reality. This ripple effect is a hallmark of suburban life, where social networks are often deeply intertwined through schools, clubs, and local organizations. Throughout this series, we will be diving into the step-by-step reality of how these domestic collapses occur. We will examine the legal nuances of no-fault divorce in a suburban context, the shifting landscape of alimony and child support in high-cost-of-living areas, and the specific psychological toll on children who are raised in environments where everything looks fine. We are moving beyond the surface-level gossip and looking at the structural, economic, and historical forces that make the American suburbs a unique battlefield for the modern marriage. This is not about assigning blame. It is about understanding a systemic shift in how we live, how we love, and why for many the white picket fence is no longer enough to keep the world out or the family in. Prepare for a deep dive into the data, the stories, and the hidden mechanics of the great suburban split. This is part 1 of our study, and the journey into the heart of the American household is only just beginning. To understand the mechanics of the suburban split in 2026, we have to look at the geometry of the life itself. We are moving past the generalities and into the specific day-to-day architecture of how a modern suburban marriage begins to fracture. Imagine a couple named Sarah and Mark Davis living in a premier master-planned community just outside of Charlotte, North Carolina. It is 2026, and they are the quintessential success story of their social circle. They own a 5-bedroom smart home, drive 2 high-end electric SUVs, and their 2 children are enrolled in specialized STEM academies. On paper, their life is an achievement. However, historical trends suggest that the very features of this lifestyle are the primary drivers of their eventual legal separation. The first factor we must analyze is the concept of affluent isolation. In many 2026 suburban developments, houses are designed for total self-sufficiency. Mark and Sarah have a home gym, a home theater, a backyard kitchen, and high-speed fiber optics that allow them to work entirely from home. While this sounds like a luxury, sociological case studies show that it effectively removes the third places, the cafes, parks, and community centers where humans historically interacted outside of the home. For the Devises, the home has become a gilded silo. When conflict arises, there is no external community to buffer the tension. They are trapped in a constant feedback loop of their own domestic stressors. In previous decades, the commute or the local neighborhood pub provided a psychological transition period. In 2026, the transition from vice president of operations to stressed spouse happens in the 3 seconds it takes to walk from the home office to the kitchen island. Historical trends in suburban development have also led to what experts call the optimization of the household. Every minute of the Davis family's day is tracked via synchronized digital calendars. There are scheduled times for meal prep, athletic training for the kids, and even quality time. This level of hyperscheduling creates a potential outcome where the marriage is treated like a logistics firm rather than a romantic partnership. When one person fails to optimize their portion of the labor, perhaps Mark forgets to initiate the grocery delivery or Sarah misses a parent-teacher conference notification, it is seen not as a human error, but as a failure of the system. In high-stakes suburban environments, efficiency is the new currency, and when the efficiency breaks down, the resentment builds with clinical precision. Consider the data surrounding suburban property taxes and maintenance costs in 2026. Following the economic shifts of the early 2020s, the cost of maintaining a top-tier suburban lifestyle has escalated. Case studies indicate that many suburban couples are currently house-rich and cash-poor. The pressure to maintain the aesthetic of the neighborhood, the pristine landscaping, the seasonal decor, the membership at the local athletic club, creates a chronic state of low-level financial panic. For Sarah and Mark, this manifests as a locked-in effect. They are aware that their 2% mortgage rate from years ago is their greatest asset, but it also acts as a set of golden handcuffs. In 2026, we are seeing many couples remain in high-conflict marriages purely because the cost of exit, specifically the loss of that low-interest debt, would result in a total collapse of their social standing. This financial stalemate often leads to years of quiet desperation before the eventual explosion. Imagine if Sarah and Mark finally decide to sit down and discuss their unhappiness. In the suburbs, this conversation rarely happens in a vacuum. It is heavily influenced by the social comparison trap. In 2026, the Joneses have moved from the driveway to the smartphone screen. Sarah sees the curated highlight reels of her neighbors' anniversary trips and home renovations on social platforms. This creates a psychological phenomenon where she compares her behind-the-scenes reality with everyone else's highlight reel. Case studies on suburban mental health show that this constant exposure to perceived perfection leads to a sense of relative deprivation. She feels that her marriage is failing because it doesn't look like the 4K resolution version she sees online, even if those very neighbors are going through similar struggles behind closed doors. We must also examine the shifting roles of the second shift in the 2026 suburban context. With the rise of the hybrid work model, the boundaries between professional and domestic life have blurred entirely. Historical trends show that even in dual-income suburban households, the mental load, the invisible work of managing a family's emotional and logistical needs, still falls disproportionately on one partner. In our case study, Sarah manages the health insurance claims, the tutor schedules, the summer camp registrations, and the household social calendar. Mark, working from the basement office, perceives the household as running itself because he is shielded from the labor. This disparity in perceived effort is the leading cause of suburban divorce filings. It isn't usually one big event that triggers the split. It is the thousand small instances where one partner feels like an employee in their own home. Step by step, the erosion of the suburban marriage often follows a predictable path. It starts with the silent kitchen, where the couple eats meals while checking their respective devices, prioritizing external digital connections over the person sitting 3 feet away. It moves to the wing separation, where the sheer size of modern suburban homes allows the couple to occupy different floors or wings for entire evenings, avoiding the friction of interaction. Finally, it reaches the social decoupling phase, where they begin attending suburban social functions separately or arriving in different vehicles, signaling to the community that the partnership is no longer a unified front. In 2026, the specific geography of the suburb also complicates the exit strategy. In an urban environment, moving out might mean moving 3 blocks away. In the suburbs, a divorce often necessitates moving out of the school district, which is a non-negotiable for many parents. This leads to the birdnesting potential outcome, a trend where the children stay in the suburban home and the parents rotate in and out. While this is intended to provide stability for the kids, case studies show it often extends the conflict, as the parents are still forced to manage the same physical space and suburban expenses that caused the friction in the first place. The 2026 suburban divorce is a high-stakes chess match where the board is a half-acre lot, and the pieces are social status, school district access, and home equity. As we look deeper into the data, we see that the suburban dream has evolved into a complex machine that requires constant, perfect maintenance. When that maintenance becomes too expensive, emotionally or financially, the machine breaks, often in the most public and painful way possible. But what happens when the decision is finally made? What does the actual process of dismantling $1 million suburban life look like in a legal system that is increasingly overwhelmed? As we move forward, we have to ask, what is the true cost of the clean break in an environment where everything is interconnected? How do these couples handle the division of assets that are not just financial, but deeply social and psychological? The answers lie in the upcoming legal and financial breakdown of the suburban split. We are about to look at the valuation wars and the specific tactics used by high-net-worth suburbanites to protect their future. The battle for the cul-de-sac is about to get much more intense. Part 3 will examine the legal battlefield where the picket fence finally comes down. When the picket fence finally comes down, it does not fall quietly. In the legal corridors of 2026, the suburban divorce has evolved into a high-tech, high-stakes tactical operation. We are moving into the discovery phase, the period where the carefully curated image of suburban bliss is deconstructed into a series of spreadsheets, metadata, and forensic audits. For a couple like Mark and Sarah Davis, this is the moment where the private becomes public and the emotional becomes mathematical. In the American legal system, particularly in affluent suburban jurisdictions, the objective is rarely just about who gets what. It is about who can maintain the lifestyle established during the marriage. Step 1 of this legal battlefield is the lifestyle analysis. In 2026, forensic accountants do not just look at bank statements. They perform a comprehensive audit of a family's digital footprint. Imagine if Mark claims his income has dipped due to market volatility. The legal team representing Sarah will use historical trends to map out their spending over the last 3 to 5 years. This includes every automated grocery delivery, every high-end fitness subscription, the recurring costs of the landscaping crew that keeps their lawn at exactly 2.5 inches, and the private tutoring fees that ensure their children remain competitive for the Ivy League. In the suburbs, the lifestyle is the evidence. If the records show they were spending $20,000 a month on non-essential suburban luxuries, the court uses this data to establish the standard of living. This standard then dictates the potential outcomes for alimony and child support. Alimony is no longer a simple calculation. In 2026, it is a complex negotiation over the right to remain in a specific social strata. The second front of this war is the valuation of the suburban fortress itself. In the current 2026 economic climate, the family home is often a poison chalice. While the equity in a 5-bedroom suburban home might be substantial, the cost of refinancing at current market rates makes a traditional buyout nearly impossible for many. Historical trends in 2026 show a rise in what is known as deferred sale agreements. In this scenario, Mark and Sarah might be forced into a legal contract where they both remain on the deed for another 5 years until the youngest child graduates high school. This creates a psychological purgatory. They are legally untethered but financially shackled to the same asset. The step-by-step negotiation of who pays for the roof repair, who manages the HOA fees, and who gets to use the guest suite on weekends becomes a legal minefield that requires constant mediation. Then comes the digital discovery, which has reached a level of granularity in 2026 that would have been unimaginable a decade ago. We are talking about the smart home as a silent witness. In the suburbs, where security is a priority, almost every movement is logged. Legal teams now routinely subpoena data from smart doorbells, interior security cameras, and even smart appliance locks. If Mark claims he was the primary caregiver during a certain period, but the smart lock data shows he was leaving the house at 7 a.m. and not returning until 8 p.m., his credibility is decimated. Case studies from 2026 indicate that the logs from a Tesla or a Rivian can be used to track a spouse's movements with GPS precision, providing a second-by-second account of their whereabouts during contested periods. This level of surveillance within the marriage creates an environment where there are no secrets, only data points waiting to be weaponized in a courtroom. We must also examine the zip code battle, which is the suburban version of a custody war. In the United States, your zip code determines your child's future through school district access. For Sarah and Mark, the custody arrangement is not just about time, it is about geography. If Sarah wants to move 20 miles away to a more affordable area, she is effectively removing the children from their social and educational ecosystem. In 2026, courts are increasingly seeing litigation focused on the best interests of the child, specifically regarding extracurricular stability. This means the legal fight extends to who will drive the children to travel soccer practice, who will manage the logistics of the elite dance troupe, and which parent is better equipped to handle the rigorous scheduling of a high-performance suburban childhood. The potential outcome of losing this battle is not just losing time with the children. It is the loss of the child standing in their community. Furthermore, we are seeing the rise of the reputation management clause in suburban divorce settlements. In 2026, your digital reputation is a professional and social asset. High-net-worth individuals in the suburbs are now including non-disparagement agreements that cover social media platforms. These clauses are designed to prevent the public airing of domestic grievances that could damage a career or a social standing. If Mark posts a cryptic or negative update that can be traced back to Sarah, he could face significant financial penalties outlined in the divorce decree. This is the new reality of the suburban split. Even your personal feelings are subject to a contractual agreement designed to protect the brand of the family. Step by step, the process of dismantling the life involves the division of non-tangible assets. Think about the country club membership, the shared season tickets to the NFL or the local theater, and even the points accumulated in luxury travel programs. In a suburban context, these are not just perks. They are the connective tissue of a person's social life. Dividing these assets often requires a level of precision that leads to months of back and forth between attorneys. Who keeps the relationship with the premier wealth manager? Who gets to remain on the board of the local nonprofit? These are the questions that define the suburban divorce in 2026. It is a systematic deconstruction of an identity that was built on the foundation of the couple. As we look at the data, we also see a shift toward collaborative law in these high-stakes environments. Because the costs of a full-scale trial in a suburban jurisdiction can easily exceed six figures, many 2026 couples are opting for a private, mediated approach. However, this is only successful if both parties are willing to be transparent with their data. When one party suspects the other is hiding assets, perhaps in a cold storage crypto wallet or a domestic offshore account, the collaborative process breaks down and the litigation machine takes over. This is when the private investigators are brought in to conduct surveillance on the local suburban landscape, looking for signs of undisclosed spending or hidden relationships. The legal battlefield of the suburbs is a reflection of the complexity of the life itself. It is a world where every asset has an emotional weight, and every emotional wound has a financial price. For Mark and Sarah, the end of the marriage is the beginning of a cold war over the remnants of their shared dream. They are learning that the legal system is not designed to provide closure. It is designed to provide a division of property. And in the suburbs, property is everything. But as the legal dust begins to settle, a new and perhaps more devastating challenge emerges. Beyond the money, the house, and the reputation, there is the psychological reality of the aftermath. How do you rebuild an identity when the very community you live in was built for couples? What happens to the social structures that supported you when you are no longer part of the unit? The next phase of our study moves away from the courtroom and into the quiet, often darker corners of suburban life. We are going to look at the social isolation of the newly divorced and the phenomenon of the suburban pariah. If you thought the legal battle was intense, wait until you see the social consequences of the split. Part 4 will explore the hidden psychological toll and the shifting social dynamics of the post-divorce cul-de-sac. The story of the Davis family is about to take a very personal turn. The transition from the courtroom to the driveway is where the theoretical reality of a legal decree meets the visceral experience of suburban life. For Mark and Sarah Davis, the signing of the papers in early 2026 is merely the end of a legal process. It is the beginning of a social and psychological restructuring that many are never fully prepared for. In the American suburbs, the landscape is not just physical. It is a meticulously constructed social ecosystem designed for pairs. When one half of a pair is removed, the remaining individual becomes a social outlier in a community that values symmetry above almost all else. We are now entering the phase of the suburban pariah, a phenomenon where the newly divorced individual must navigate a world that suddenly feels like it was built for someone else. Historical trends in 2026 suggest that the first thing to disappear is the social calendar. Imagine Sarah Davis sitting in her designer kitchen, looking at her integrated digital home hub. For years, the calendar was a tapestry of double dates, neighborhood block parties, and joint family vacations. But as the news of the separation spreads through the cul-de-sac via the high-speed grapevine of neighborhood apps and school group chats, those invitations begin to evaporate. This is what sociologists call the defensive exclusion. In affluent suburban circles, divorce is often viewed as a form of social contagion. Stable couples, whether consciously or not, begin to distance themselves from the divorced individual to protect the perceived sanctity of their own unions. They fear that the Davis split will force them to examine the cracks in their own foundations. Sarah isn't just losing a husband. She is losing her membership in the most exclusive club in the suburbs, the happily married elite. Step by step, the isolation intensifies. Case studies from 2026 highlight the odd number effect. In a suburban social landscape dominated by couples-only dinner parties and four-person golf outings, a single person is a logistical complication. For Mark, who may have moved into a high-end luxury apartment near the regional business hub, the isolation is often more immediate. Historical data indicates that in suburban marriages, the female partner often acts as the social architect. Without Sarah to manage the logistics of their social life, Mark finds himself digitally ghosted by the very men he considered his closest friends. Their relationships were predicated on the couple-friend dynamic. Without the wife's connection, The men find they have little to talk about besides the awkward reality of the split. Mark is left in a state of social atrophy, surrounded by high-tech amenities, but devoid of meaningful human interaction. The psychological toll is further exacerbated by the physical environment of the 2026 suburban home. For whichever spouse remains in the family residence, the house itself becomes a repository of psychological triggers. Imagine if Sarah's the one who stays. The smart home technology designed to make life seamless now acts as a silent witness to the absence. The automated lighting scenes that once adjusted for family dinners now highlight an empty chair. The security cameras that Mark used to check from his phone now represent a breach of privacy and a lingering digital tie that is difficult to sever. Historical trends in 2026 point to a rise in environmental trauma within large suburban homes, where the sheer volume of unused space creates a sense of profound loneliness. The 5-bedroom house, once a symbol of success, is now a 5,000 square foot reminder of a failed project. Furthermore, we must address the scarlet D at the school gate. In 2026, the suburban school district is the ultimate social filter. For Sarah, the morning drop-off becomes an exercise in psychological endurance. She is acutely aware of the glances from other parents, some pitying, some judgmental. Data from 2026 sociological surveys suggest that divorced parents in high-performing districts feel a heightened pressure to perform perfect parenting to combat the stigma of the broken home. Sarah feels she cannot afford a single mistake. If her children are late, if their laundry isn't pristine, or if she misses a volunteer opportunity, she perceives it as a public confirmation of her failure. This hypervigilance leads to a specific type of suburban burnout, where the individual is performing an identity of stability, while their internal world is in chaos. Consider the role of reputation management in the digital age of 2026. In the suburbs, your public-facing persona is a form of currency. When Mark and Sarah split, they both faced the challenge of rebranding themselves. Historical trends show that suburban divorcees often engage in status overcompensation. Mark might start posting aggressive updates about his fitness journey or professional triumphs to prove he is thriving. Sarah might curate an endless stream of joyful moments with the children. This digital performance is a defense mechanism against the suburban pity that is often more damaging than anger. But behind the 4K filters, the data tells a different story. Case studies on post-divorce mental health in the 2026 suburbs show a significant spike in anxiety disorders, linked specifically to the loss of social standing. We also have to look at the secondary losses. This involves the loss of relationships with in-laws, the loss of shared history with long-term neighbors, and even the loss of the future self that was tied to the marriage. In the suburbs, where lives are often planned decades in advance, from the college fund to the retirement villa, the sudden removal of that roadmap is disorienting. Step by step, the newly divorced person must reconstruct a future from the wreckage of the past. This is especially difficult in 2026 because the cost of living in these premier zip codes often requires too high-level incomes. The psychological stress of "can I afford to stay?" is constant. Sarah is not just grieving her marriage, she is grieving her zip code. The social dynamics of the post-divorce cul-de-sac are a study in human fragility. The very community that was supposed to provide a safety net often becomes a source of stress. But as the social circles tighten and the house feels colder, the economic reality begins to set in with a new, sharper edge. The division of assets was the legal battle. The maintenance of the new reality is the economic war. In 2026, we are seeing a trend where the middle-class suburban divorce is becoming a thing of the past. You are either wealthy enough to fund 2 suburban lives, or you are forced into a radical downward mobility that reshapes your entire identity. What happens when the hidden debt of the suburban dream finally comes due? Beyond the mortgage and the car payments, there is a complex web of financial obligations that most couples ignore until it is too late. As we move into the next phase of our study, we are going to look at the wealth erosion that occurs when one household becomes 2. We are talking about the suburban poverty trap that hides behind high-end siding and luxury appliances. How do you maintain the appearance of success when the bank accounts are being drained by dual sets of overhead? The next part of our study will dismantle the financial myth of the suburban recovery. We are about to look at the cost of exit and why, in 2026, some people find that they simply cannot afford to be single. Part 5 will dive into the brutal economics of the split, where the numbers finally stop lying. The Davis family is about to face their most difficult calculation yet. The calculation of a suburban dream usually happens in the presence of a realtor and a mortgage broker. But the calculation of a suburban nightmare happens in a windowless room with 2 lawyers and a forensic accountant. For Mark and Sarah Davis, the financial reality of 2026 has turned their divorce into a mathematical crisis. In the American suburbs, where the cost of living has outpaced wage growth for the better part of a decade, the economics of a split are no longer just about dividing assets. It is about the terrifying realization that the same amount of money that funded one high-end lifestyle cannot, under any circumstances, fund 2 versions of that same life. Historical trends indicate that a household's efficiency is rooted in shared overhead, and when that overhead doubles, the standard of living doesn't just drop, it often craters. Imagine if Mark and Sarah's combined income is $350,000. In most of the United States, that places them in the top tier of earners. However, in their specific suburban enclave, that income was already being stretched to its absolute limit to maintain the 2026 suburban aesthetic. Step by step, we have to look at the fixed costs that do not disappear when the marriage does. The mortgage on their 5-bedroom home is $7,000 a month, locked in at a rate they will never see again. If they sell that house to split the equity, they are entering a 2026 housing market where a 3-bedroom townhouse in the same school district might cost them $6,000 a month due to inflated interest rates and property values. This is the housing trap of the modern suburb. You cannot afford to stay, but you literally cannot afford to leave without moving 20 miles away and losing your community status. The second economic pillar to crumble is the service economy that sustains suburban life. Case studies from 2026 show that the invisible labor Sarah performed, managing the household, the children's schedules, and the domestic logistics, now has a specific high market price tag. Because both Mark and Sarah must now work at peak capacity to fund their separate households, they can no longer trade time for money. They must buy time. This means the potential outcomes include a massive spike in expenditures for childcare, house cleaning, lawn maintenance, and grocery delivery. In a dual household scenario, the suburban burn rate can be calculated using a simple but devastating formula. B. Total égale H. 1 plus H. 2 plus C. 1 plus C. 2
plus U.
1
plus U.
2
plus L.
Et. In this equation, B. Total represents the total monthly burn. H is the housing cost. C is childcare. U is utilities, and L. Et. is the lifestyle extension cost, the price of maintaining the extracurricular activities that keep the children in their social circles. For the Davises, their monthly expenses haven't just increased by 50%. They have nearly doubled, while their net income remains stagnant. Historical trends also point toward the subscription divorce. As a unique 2026 phenomenon, suburban households are now entangled in a web of recurring digital costs that are difficult to untangle. We aren't just talking about streaming services. We are talking about the smart home security contracts, the high-end fitness memberships, the automated supplement deliveries, and the private school tuition. When Mark moves into his luxury apartment, he finds that his individual cost of existence is nearly 80% of what the entire family's cost was just a year prior. He is paying for a smaller version of the same life, but the price tag hasn't shrunk in proportion to the square footage. This leads to a state of constant financial anxiety that historical case studies suggest is a primary driver of post-divorce litigation. People don't sue because they are greedy. They sue because they are drowning in the overhead of the suburban dream. Furthermore, we must address the tax implications which, in 2026, have become increasingly complex for the suburban professional. Filing as single or head of household, instead of married filing jointly, often results in a significant increase in the effective tax rate. For high earners like Mark, the loss of the marital deduction, combined with the new limits on state and local tax deductions, means a larger portion of his paycheck is redirected to the government just as his personal expenses are peaking. This is the tax cliff of the suburban split. It is a potential outcome that many couples fail to model until they are already 6 months into the process and realize their take-home pay no longer covers their basic obligations. Consider the data on asset liquidity. In the suburbs, wealth is often trapped. Mark and Sarah might have a net worth of $2 million, but $1.5 million of that is tied up in home equity, and another $400,000 is in retirement accounts that carry heavy penalties for early withdrawal. When the divorce is finalized, they have plenty of wealth but very little cash. In 2026, we see many suburban divorcees living in a state of affluent poverty. They are driving a $70,000 car and living in a $1 million home, but they are using high-interest credit cards to pay for the children's summer camp because their liquidity has been wiped out by legal fees and the cost of setting up a second household. The financial deconstruction of the Davis family is a step-by-step lesson in the fragility of the American middle and upper middle class. Every line item on their bank statement is a battleground. Who pays for the 2026-era high-speed satellite internet? Who covers the rising cost of private insurance premiums for the kids? Who is responsible for the unexpected maintenance of a suburban home that is now 5 years older and starting to require structural investment? In a marriage, these are shared problems. In a divorce, they are weapons. The psychological stress of this economic war of attrition often leads to a total breakdown in co-parenting, as every request for money is seen as a personal attack or a strategic move. As we look at the spreadsheets and the forensic audits, a dark truth emerges about the 2026 suburban landscape. The infrastructure of our lives, the houses we live in, the schools our kids attend, the cars we drive, was never designed to be divided. It was designed to be consumed by a unit. When that unit splits, the infrastructure itself begins to fail. Mark and Sarah are learning that you cannot simply cut a suburban life in half and expect both halves to keep beating. You are often left with two dying organisms. But as the financial war rages on, there is another group of people caught in the crossfire, the ones for whom the suburbs were supposedly built in the first place. Beyond the bank accounts and the legal filings, the children of the suburban split are navigating a world where their reality is being bifurcated. How do they handle the transition between two high-stakes, high-stress environments? What happens to the suburban child when the fortress of their home is no longer a sanctuary, but a partition zone? We are moving from the economics of the parents to the psychology of the progeny. The next part of our study will explore the two-house trauma and the specific challenges of raising resilient kids in a 2026 suburban split. The Davis children are about to become the most important data points in this entire study. Part 6 will look at the collateral damage of the cul-de-sac. The shift from the financial and legal deconstruction of a marriage to the lived experience of the children is where the true cost of suburban divorce is recorded. In the high-stakes environment of 2026, the suburban child is not just a family member. They are a project in development, a high-performance asset that requires specific inputs to maintain a competitive edge. When Leo, who is 12, and Maya, who is 8, find their world split into two separate zip codes, the impact is not just emotional. It is a fundamental disruption of the logistics and social scaffolding that define their identities. Historical trends in 2026 indicate that the suburban child in a divorce transition faces a unique form of two-house trauma, where the pressure to remain resilient is as heavy as the pressure to remain at the top of their class. Imagine the Davis children on a typical Sunday evening in 2026. This is the handoff, a ritualized exchange that often takes place in the neutral territory of a high-end grocery store parking lot or a well-lit community center. For Leo and Maya, the transition is a physical and psychological recalibration. Step by step, they must audit their belongings. In the 2026 suburban landscape, this isn't just about clothes, it is about the digital ecosystem. Leo has to ensure his high refresh rate gaming laptop, his VR study goggles, and his specialized athletic sensors are all accounted for. If a charger is left at Mark's apartment, the entire week's academic and extracurricular schedule is jeopardized. This creates a state of chronic low-level hypervigilance. Case studies on suburban youth show that children in these scenarios develop a bag lady syndrome, where they feel they can never fully unpack because they are always preparing for the next move. Their bedroom is no longer a sanctuary. It is a temporary station. The 2026 suburban school district adds a layer of structural stress to this dislocation. In these elite communities, the school is the center of the universe. When Sarah and Mark lived together, the home was a unified support system for Leo's advanced STEM track and Maya's competitive gymnastics. Now that support system is fragmented. Imagine if Leo has a major project due on Monday morning. He spent the weekend at Mark's apartment, but the specialized 3D printing supplies he needs are in the craft room at Sarah's house. In an urban environment, a quick trip might solve this, but in the sprawling American suburbs of 2026, a 40-minute round trip through heavy traffic is a significant barrier. Historical data suggests that the logistical friction of suburban divorce leads to a measurable dip in the academic performance of high-achieving students, not because of a lack of intelligence, but because of the sheer exhaustion of managing two different lifestyles. Furthermore, we must analyze the extracurricular warfare that takes place in the post-divorce suburban cul-de-sac. In 2026, a child's social standing is often tied to their participation in elite travel sports or specialized arts programs. These activities are expensive and time-consuming. For the Davis family, the potential outcomes of the divorce include a fight over who pays for Maya's $1,200 a month gymnastics coaching and who is responsible for the 6-hour round trips to regional meets. When parents are in a state of financial attrition, these activities often become leverage. Mark might view the gymnastics as an unnecessary luxury, while Sarah views it as a vital link to Maya's social circle. The child becomes the prize in a tug-of-war over lifestyle continuity. Case studies indicate that when children realize their hobbies are a source of conflict between their parents, they often begin to self-censor, suppressing their own interests to keep the peace. This is the performance of resilience, where the child pretends to be fine with quitting a beloved activity to reduce the tension at the dinner table. We also have to look at the digital shadow of parenting in 2026. In the suburbs, technology is used to bridge the gap between two homes, but it often serves as a tool for surveillance. Sarah and Mark use shared custody apps to track expenses and schedules, but these apps also log the children's locations with GPS precision. Maya's smartwatch and Leo's smartphone are constantly broadcasting data. If Mark notices that Leo is still awake at 11:30 p.m. on a school night at Sarah's house, he might send a sharp message or file a note for the next mediation session. The children feel this invisible observation. They are aware that their behavior in one house is being monitored by the parent in the other. This creates a sense of being always on, with no private space to simply exist without being a data point in their parents' ongoing legal or emotional struggle. The social peer group in 2026 suburbs is equally unforgiving. For Leo, the news of the divorce is not just a personal matter. It is a social shift. In the suburbs, families often socialize as units. When the unit breaks, the children's place in the neighborhood pack can become unstable. Imagine if the other parents in the neighborhood, who are still married, find it awkward to invite Leo over, because they don't want to deal with the logistics of which parent is dropping him off. Historical trends show that children of divorce in affluent suburbs often experience a secondary social loss, where they are subtly excluded from the informal community gatherings that define their childhood. They become the divorced house on the block, a label that carries a weight of perceived instability in a culture that prizes the appearance of perfect order. Psychologically, the 2026 suburban child is navigating a bifurcated identity. At Mark's apartment, Leo might have to be the man of the house, or the emotional anchor for a father who is struggling with isolation. At Sarah's house, he might have to be the resilient student, who proves to his mother that the divorce hasn't affected him. This code switching is exhausting. Data from 2026 adolescent mental health surveys shows that suburban children of divorce have higher rates of internalizing disorders, anxiety and depression that are masked by high grades and good behavior. They are not acting out, they are locking in, focusing on the one thing they can control, their output. But behind the straight-A report cards and the trophies, the foundation is cracking. Step by step, the children learn to navigate the minefield of loyalty. Every time Maya mentions a fun trip she took with her father, she has to gauge her mother's reaction. Every time Leo asks his father for help with a school form, he has to wonder if it will trigger a fight about who has legal decision-making authority. In the suburbs, where everything is documented and every choice is a statement, the children become experts in emotional auditing. They are constantly calculating the risk of their own words. This is the collateral damage of the cul-de-sac. We have built communities that are so optimized for success that they have no room for the messy, inefficient reality of a family in crisis. As the Davis children adapt to their new reality, they are essentially becoming little adults, managing schedules and emotional landscapes that would challenge a corporate executive. They are the silent witnesses to the dismantling of the suburban dream. But as the children find their footing in this new, divided world, a new variable is about to enter the equation. The single-parent phase of the suburban divorce is often just a transition. In 2026, the arrival of the new partner is the next massive shockwave to hit the cul-de-sac. How do you introduce a new person into a digital and physical environment that was meticulously built for someone else? What happens to the step-parent dynamic in an era of high-tech surveillance and rigid social cliques? The introduction of a third or fourth adult into the suburban power dynamic is where things get truly complicated. We are moving from the divided household to the blended battlefield. The next part of our study will look at the re-entry phase and the arrival of the suburban interloper. Part 7 will explore the explosive chemistry of new relationships in an old zip code. The story of the Davis family is about to get crowded. The re-entry phase of a suburban divorce in 2026 is often characterized by a sharp pivot from mourning to marketing. For Mark Davis, the silence of his tech-forward apartment in the city's perimeter becomes the catalyst for a digital resurrection. In the American suburbs, where your worth is often measured by your partnership status, being single is viewed as a temporary glitch in the system. Historical trends suggest that high-earning suburban men tend to re-enter the dating market faster than their female counterparts, often utilizing AI-curated platforms designed for the ultra-high net worth demographic. Mark joins a service called Elite Sync, which uses biometric data and social graph analysis to match individuals not just on personality, but on lifestyle compatibility and zip code trajectory. Imagine if Mark's first date with a woman named Elena, a 34-year-old corporate attorney, is recorded not in a diary, but through a series of digital breadcrumbs. Sarah, back in the family home, sees the soft launch on social media. It starts with a photo of two high-end cocktails against a blurred backdrop of a rooftop lounge. In the tight-knit social circles of the 2026 suburbs, this is an opening salvo in a new kind of psychological warfare. Case studies show that the introduction of a new partner is the single most common trigger for a relapse into high-conflict litigation. For Sarah, the sight of Elena isn't just a personal blow. It is a threat to the stability of the family brand. She begins to wonder if this new person will be sitting in her chair at the next neighborhood gala or, more importantly, interacting with Leo and Maya. Step by step, the integration of an interloper into the suburban ecosystem follows a fraught protocol. In 2026, the first hurdle is the legal boundary known as the morality clause. Many suburban divorce decrees now include specific language regarding overnight guests. For Mark and Sarah, their agreement states that no unrelated romantic partner may stay overnight while the children are in the residence for the first 12 months following the split. This is where the smart home acts as a digital narc. Sarah's legal team can, in theory, subpoena the log files of Mark's smart lock. If the data shows Elena's biometric signature entering at 10 p.m. and not leaving until 7 a.m., Mark is in technical violation of his custody agreement. This level of granular surveillance creates a potential outcome where new relationships are forced into a state of suburban clandestinity, adding a layer of artificial tension to an already delicate situation. The arrival of the new partner also triggers the phenomenon of suburban social contagion. When Mark brings Elena to a community fundraising event in their old zip code, the reaction from the married elite is a study in sociological friction. The men in the group, many of whom are feeling the weight of their own long-term marriages, often view Mark's new relationship with a mixture of envy and apprehension. The women often rally around Sarah, viewing Elena as a functional replacement that could just as easily happen to them. Case studies indicate that the new partner is rarely seen as an individual. They are seen as a symbol of the discarded spouse's obsolescence. Elena must navigate a minefield of polite but frozen smiles and coded questions about her background, her career, and her intentions with the Davis children. Then we must address the step-parent onboarding process, which in 2026 involves a complex digital handover. Imagine if Mark decides it is time for Elena to meet Leo and Maya. In a suburban household, this isn't just a dinner. It is an integration into the family's technological infrastructure. Mark has to decide when to give Elena access to the smart home's guest profile, allowing her to control the climate, the lighting, and the security systems. For the children, seeing a stranger gain control over the physical environment that Sarah once managed is a visceral intrusion. Maya, who is 8, might feel a sense of betrayal when she sees Elena using the same kitchen interface her mother used to prepare school lunches. Data from 2026 child psychology reports suggest that this digital displacement can be more jarring for suburban children than the actual presence of the new adult. Furthermore, the financial burden of the new relationship adds a fresh layer of exhaustion to the suburban split. Mark is already paying significant alimony and child support to maintain Sarah's household in the premier school district. Now he is also funding a lifestyle for Elena that matches the suburban standard. This is the blended family burn rate. Historical trends show that many newly divorced suburban men overextend themselves financially during the first 2 years of a new relationship to prove that they have not lost their status. Mark is buying high-end gifts, planning luxury travel, and looking for a larger suburban home that can accommodate both Elena and the children during his custody weeks. The potential outcome is a state of perpetual financial fragility, where one market downturn or one professional setback could lead to a total collapse of both households. The relationship between Sarah and Elena is the ultimate high-stakes chess match. In the 2026 suburbs, this often plays out through the children's schedules. Sarah might suddenly become much less flexible with the logistics of travel, sports, or tutoring if she knows Elena will be the one providing the transportation. This is what experts call the gatekeeping effect. Sarah uses her role as the primary social architect to ensure that Elena remains an outsider. If Elena tries to help Maya with her gymnastics routine or Leo with his STEM project, Sarah may perceive it as an attempt to rewrite the family's history. The children are caught in the middle of this emotional auditing, constantly checking their own behavior to ensure they aren't being too friendly with Elena in a way that would hurt their mother. Consider the role of the neighborhood grapevine in 2026. Within 48 hours of Elena's first appearance in the cul-de-sac, her entire professional history and social media presence have been vetted by the local parents group. If there is any discrepancy between her public persona and her reality, it will be found and weaponized. In the suburbs, you are only as good as your latest background check. Elena is not just dating Mark. She is auditioning for a role in a community that has a very low tolerance for outliers. If she doesn't fit the specific aesthetic of the high-achieving suburbanite, the social exclusion will be swift and total, leaving Mark in the difficult position of choosing between his new partner and his old social network. Step by step, the Davis family is moving toward a state of blended complexity that few are equipped to manage. The dream of a clean break has been replaced by the reality of an expanding web of obligations, surveillance, and social friction. We are seeing a new demographic in the 2026 suburbs, the multi-household unit, connected by legal decrees and digital logs, but separated by deep-seated resentment and the constant pressure to perform. The story is no longer about two people. It is about a system that is struggling to incorporate new variables without crashing. As the new partners become permanent fixtures, the focus shifts back to the ultimate prize in the suburban divorce: the legacy. Beyond the house, the money, and the new relationships, there is the question of what this all means for the future of the children. We are moving into the endgame of the suburban split, where the long-term effects on the next generation begin to manifest. How do the resilient kids of 2026 handle the transition into their own adulthood? What happens to the suburban dream when it is inherited by those who saw it fall apart? The next part of our study will examine the generational fallout and the rise of the post-suburban mindset. Part 8 will look at the long-term psychological data and the eventual fate of the Davis children as they navigate the wreckage of the cul-de-sac. The true impact of the split is only now becoming clear. The true impact of the split is only now becoming clear as we move from the immediate shock of the legal and financial battle into the chronic, long-term reality of the suburban aftermath. In the American suburbs of 2026, we are beginning to see the emergence of a specific sociological phenomenon: the generational fallout of the high-stakes household. For Leo and Maya Davis, the years following their parents' separation have been a masterclass in adaptation. But historical trends suggest that this adaptation comes with a profound psychological price. We are no longer looking at a temporary disruption. We are looking at the permanent restructuring of the suburban child's identity and their future expectations of stability. By 2026, Leo has reached his middle teens, a period where identity formation usually happens through social exploration. However, in the context of a suburban divorce, Leo's energy is diverted into what experts call instrumental parentification. Because Mark and Sarah Davis have struggled to maintain a direct line of communication without the intervention of mediation software or legal representatives, Leo has stepped into the role of the primary domestic diplomat. Step by step, he has learned to manage the complex logistics of the two-house system. He is the one who monitors the shared digital calendar to ensure his specialized science equipment is moved between houses. He is the one who subtly alters the tone of his messages to each parent to avoid triggering a new round of conflict. Case studies on suburban youth indicate that this level of responsibility creates a potential outcome where the child feels a premature sense of adulthood, leading to a profound sense of exhaustion before they even reach college. Leo is not just a student. He is a project manager for a broken firm. Maya, now entering her preteen years, represents the high-functioning facade that is prevalent in high-performing suburban districts. Historical trends show that young girls in these environments often adopt a performance of perfection as a defense mechanism. If the home life is chaotic, the school life and the extracurricular life must be flawless. Maya has become the star of her gymnastics team and a straight-A student, but data from 2026 mental health surveys suggests that this success is often a mask for internalizing disorders. She feels that if she can maintain the appearance of the perfect suburban child, she can provide a sense of stability for her mother and a sense of pride for her father, thereby preventing further emotional collapse in the family unit. This is the resilience myth. While the community looks at Maya and sees a success story, the reality is a child who is constantly auditing her own behavior to ensure she is not a burden. The 2026 suburban landscape has also introduced the digital shadow of relationship modeling. Leo and Maya are the first generation to see the entirety of a marriage's dissolution through the lens of data. They have seen the spreadsheets, the legal notifications on their parents' tablets, and the passive-aggressive updates on social platforms. This has led to a potential outcome where their view of human partnership is clinical and transactional. Case studies indicate that children of high-conflict suburban divorces in the mid-2020s are increasingly skeptical of traditional marital structures. They see the five-bedroom house not as a sanctuary, but as an asset that can be liquidated, and the marriage not as a commitment, but as a contract with a high cost of exit. We are seeing a shift toward a post-suburban mindset among the youth, where the goal is no longer the picket fence, but personal mobility and financial insulation from others. Furthermore, we must address the disruption of the success pipeline. In the affluent suburbs, the path from a top-tier school district to an elite university is a carefully managed trajectory. Historical data shows that a divorce, particularly one that involves significant wealth erosion, acts as a massive speed bump on this path. For Leo and Maya, the funds that were once earmarked for their college education have been partially diverted to cover the overhead of two high-cost suburban households and the ongoing legal fees of a protracted mediation process. The potential outcome is that these children, despite their talent and hard work, may face a form of downward mobility compared to their peers whose parents remained in a single-income pool household. This creates a sense of relative deprivation that can fuel long-term resentment toward the parents and the suburban model itself. Imagine if Leo, now looking at colleges, realizes that his dream school is no longer financially viable because his parents cannot agree on who is responsible for the tuition gap. In the 2026 economic environment, where the cost of higher education has continued to outpace inflation, this is a common flashpoint. The divorce doesn't just end at the 18-year-old mark. It extends into the child's early adulthood, influencing their career choices and their ability to start their own lives without debt. The suburban dream was built on the idea of intergenerational progress, but the suburban divorce often results in intergenerational stagnation. We also have to look at the psychological concept of the bifurcated self. In 2026, with the prevalence of biometric tracking and social monitoring, children in these scenarios feel they are living two different lives. At Mark's house with his new partner Elena, Maya has to navigate a different set of social expectations and a different digital ecosystem. At Sarah's house, she is the emotional anchor. This code switching leads to a lack of a cohesive sense of home. Historical trends suggest that for suburban children, home is often tied to the physical structure of the family residence. When that residence is sold or partitioned, the child loses their primary source of grounding. Maya and Leo are essentially digital nomads within their own zip code, moving between stations but never fully arriving. As the data points accumulate, we see that the true legacy of the suburban split is the creation of a generation that is hyper-resilient but deeply guarded. They have seen the system fail, and they have seen the cost of maintaining the facade of perfection. This leads to the ultimate irony of the suburban experiment. The very environment created to protect and nurture the family has, through the mechanics of modern divorce, become the setting for its most clinical and data-driven deconstruction. Leo and Maya are the survivors of this process, but they carry the data of the split in their psyche. The social and psychological fallout for the Davis children is just one layer of the story. As they prepare to leave the nest, a new and final reality is setting in for Mark and Sarah. The years of conflict, the millions in overhead, and the constant digital surveillance have led them to a crossroad. The suburban house is finally going on the market, but the world they are entering is nothing like the one they left when they first moved to the cul-de-sac. The endgame of the suburban divorce is not just about moving on, it is about the total liquidation of a life. What happens when the last box is taped shut, and the smart home is reset to factory settings? How do Mark and Sarah reconcile the decade of war with the reality of their new, smaller lives? The study is moving toward its conclusion as we examine the final reckoning of the suburban dream. We are about to look at the liquidation of the legacy and the cold, hard reality of the post-divorce future. Part 9 will dive into the total dissolution and the search for meaning in the wreckage of the American suburb. The picket fence is gone, and the horizon is finally visible. The final stage of the suburban divorce is the total liquidation of the dream. In 2026, this is not just a metaphor. It is a clinical, physical, and digital reality. For Mark and Sarah Davis, the closing of their divorce case coincides with the listing of the property that once defined their entire identity. In the high-stakes zip codes of the American suburbs, the home is more than a shelter. It is a performance stage for the successful family unit. When that unit dissolves, the stage must be dismantled. Historical trends indicate that the final 6 months of a suburban split are often the most psychologically taxing, as the parties move from the abstract warfare of legal filings to the visceral task of erasing their shared history. Imagine the Davis household in late 2026. A professional staging company has arrived to prepare the 5-bedroom smart home for the market. To a potential buyer, the house must look like a sanctuary of stability. The stagers remove the traces of the two-house trauma we discussed in previous parts. They hide the extra chargers for Leo's devices, they remove the duplicate calendars, and they replace the tension-filled atmosphere with the neutral scent of expensive candles and fresh linens. This is the ultimate suburban irony. Mark and Sarah are paying thousands of dollars to create the illusion of the very marriage they just spent years and hundreds of thousands of dollars destroying. Historical data suggests that suburban homes sold during a divorce often require more intensive staging, because the emotional decay of the property is often visible in neglected maintenance or the cluttered, partitioned living arrangements of the separated couple. Step by step, the liquidation process moves into the digital realm. In 2026, a smart home is a repository of intimate data. Before the keys are handed over, Mark must perform a factory reset on the entire domestic ecosystem. This is the digital equivalent of a lobotomy. He has to sever the connections between his personal devices and the smart locks, the security cameras, the climate control systems, and the integrated kitchen appliances. For a decade, these systems learned the family's habits, when they woke up, what they ate, and how they moved through the halls. Resetting these systems is a profound moment of finality. Case studies on post-divorce tech management show that many individuals feel a sense of digital ghosting during this phase, as the automated conveniences that once supported their lifestyle are suddenly stripped away, leaving them to manage their new, smaller lives without the automated scaffolding of the suburban dream. The financial reckoning of this liquidation is equally brutal. In the 2026 market, with high property taxes and the lingering effects of historical inflation, the sale of the family home rarely results in the windfall couples expect. After the mortgage is cleared, the staging fees paid, the realtor commissions settled, and the legal liens addressed, the remaining equity is divided. For Mark and Sarah, this often means that the success they built over 15 years is reduced to 2 checks that are barely enough to cover the down payments on 2 vastly inferior properties. This is the suburban wealth trap. You enter the marriage with the goal of building a legacy, but the cost of the exit is so high that the legacy is consumed by the process itself. Potential outcomes for many 2026 suburbanites include a forced move to B-tier neighborhoods or a transition back into the rental market, a move that carries a significant social stigma in their previous circles. Consider the sentimental audit that occurs during the packing phase. This is where the emotional and physical worlds collide. Sarah is left to decide which items from 15 years of marriage are worth the cost of moving. In the suburbs, where consumption is a hobby, households are often filled with high-end goods that have no place in a smaller single-parent dwelling. The designer furniture, the seasonal decor, the specialized kitchen gadgets. These are the artifacts of a life that no longer exists. Case studies show that the garage sale of the soul is a major trigger for depressive episodes. When you see your $3,000 dining table, where your children had every birthday dinner, being sold to a stranger for $300, the reality of the loss becomes unavoidable. It is no longer about the law or the money. It is about the physical erasure of your past. Furthermore, we must look at the social exodus. When the Davis house finally sells, Mark and Sarah are not just moving out of a building. They are moving out of a community. In 2026, suburban social networks are deeply rooted in the physical proximity of the cul-de-sac. Moving 5 miles away can mean the end of a decade of friendships. Sarah realizes that she will no longer see her neighbors at the morning coffee run or the evening walk. The support system that was supposed to be there for the long haul is tied to the zip code. Once you leave the zip code, you are often relegated to the status of a former neighbor, a title that quickly leads to social obsolescence. This isolation is a potential outcome that few anticipate during the heat of the initial legal battle. The search for meaning in the wreckage involves a total re-evaluation of the suburban model. By the end of 2026, many divorced individuals begin to question if the picket fence ideal was fundamentally flawed from the start. They look at the hours spent commuting, the pressure to maintain the aesthetic, and the debt accrued to fund a lifestyle that was ultimately brittle. Historical trends show a rise in solo suburbanism, where newly single individuals choose to live in high-density, walkable suburban hubs that prioritize community interaction over private square footage. They are looking for a way to maintain the safety of the suburbs without the isolation of the traditional family lot. For Mark, this means moving into a luxury condo near the transit center. For Sarah, it means finding a modern townhome with shared amenities. They are trying to build a version 2.0 of their lives that is more resilient and less dependent on the performance of perfection. Step by step, the Davis family enters the stabilization phase. Leo and Maya are now living in two different environments that bear little resemblance to their childhood home. The children have become the bridge between two separate worlds. The data on these families suggests that meaning is eventually found not in the restoration of the old life, but in the acceptance of the new one. Mark and Sarah are learning to interact as co-investors in their children's future, rather than as romantic partners or legal combatants. This shift is clinical and often cold, but it is functional. It is the final potential outcome of the suburban split, a state of high-functioning detachment. As the final box is loaded into the truck and the smart home is handed over to a new young couple, full of their own dreams and a 3% interest rate they secured through a specialized 2026 housing program, Mark and Sarah stand on the curb of the life they built. The study of their divorce is almost complete. We have analyzed the mechanics, the economics, the psychology, and the generational fallout. But there is one final question that remains for every suburbanite watching this. Is the dream itself the problem, or is it the way we try to survive it? The final part of our study will take everything we have learned, the data, the case studies, and the Davis family's journey, and look at the future of the American household. We are going to explore the preventative measures and the new models of marriage emerging in a post-2026 world. How do we build lives that don't require a forensic accountant to dismantle? The conclusion of the Great Suburban Split is about more than just an ending. It is about the blueprint for what comes next. Part 10 will deliver the masterclass summary and the strategic outlook for the modern American family. The horizon is visible, and it looks nothing like the brochures promised. The horizon is visible, and it looks nothing like the brochures promised. As we conclude this masterclass on the deconstruction of the suburban unit in 2026, we find Mark and Sarah Davis not in a state of ruin, but in a state of clinical recalibration. Mark sits in his high-efficiency apartment, overlooking the transit hub that now dictates his daily rhythm. Sarah has settled into a modern townhome 3 miles from the original family lot, a space designed for utility rather than performance. The 5-bedroom fortress has been sold to a new family, and with that sale, the data of their 15-year experiment has been finalized. We are now looking at the strategic outlook for the modern American family, using the Davis case study to understand how the suburban model must evolve if it is to survive the pressures of the mid-2020s. Historical trends in 2026 indicate a massive shift toward what sociologists are calling the marital risk assessment phase. For future couples looking to avoid the potential outcomes we have documented, the process begins long before the first mortgage application is signed. Imagine a young couple in 2026, let's call them James and Chloe, who are observing the fallout of the Davis generation. Instead of entering the suburban dream blindly, they are utilizing premarital digital audits. These are comprehensive, data-driven deep dives into financial transparency, psychological compatibility, and career trajectory alignment. Step by step, these couples are analyzing their projected suburban burn rate before they even commit to a zip code. They are looking at the historical data of their chosen community, divorce rates, property tax volatility, and the availability of third places to determine if the environment is a sanctuary or a pressure cooker. One of the most significant preventative measures emerging in 2026 is the Domestic Operating Agreement, or the DOA. This is not a prenuptial agreement in the traditional sense, which focuses on the end of the marriage. Instead, the DOA focuses on the daily operation of the marriage to prevent the accumulation of the resentment debt that destroyed Mark and Sarah. Case studies show that couples who codify their second shift labor, detailing exactly who manages the digital household logs, who handles the medical bureaucracy for the children, and how financial liquid assets are prioritized over home equity, see a marked increase in marital stability. In the suburbs, where the mental load is often the silent killer of relationships, the DOA serves as a technical manual for the household firm. It removes the ambiguity that leads to conflict. If James and Chloe decide that Chloe will manage the STEM tutoring logistics while James handles the smart home maintenance and financial audits, and they revisit this agreement quarterly, the potential outcome is a partnership based on clear expectations rather than unspoken assumptions. We must also examine the architectural shift toward resilient suburbia. The Davis family lived in a gilded silo, a massive house on a private lot that mandated isolation. In 2026, we are seeing the rise of new urbanist suburban clusters. These are developments where the houses are smaller, but the community infrastructure is denser. Imagine if Mark and Sarah had lived in a community with a shared central square, a walkable co-working hub, and integrated childcare facilities. Historical data suggests that the presence of these third places reduces the psychological strain on the marital bond. When the home is not the only place where you live, work, and socialize, the friction between spouses is dispersed into the community. The move away from the fortress lot toward the village model is a strategic response to the isolation epidemic that fueled suburban divorce rates in the early 2020s. Furthermore, the 2026 financial strategy for suburban families has moved from asset concentration to asset mobility. Mark and Sarah's greatest mistake from a purely economic perspective was tying 80% of their net worth into a single non-liquid piece of real estate. When the marriage failed, their wealth was trapped. Future suburbanites are increasingly prioritizing liquidity. They may still buy the house, but they are opting for smaller footprints and higher investment in liquid markets, private equity, or digital assets. This mobility model ensures that if a life transition occurs, whether it is a career change or a domestic split, the cost of exit is not a total financial wipeout. They are choosing golden handcuffs that are much easier to unlock. As for the legacy of the Davis children, Leo and Maya, their future in 2026 is a study in adaptive pragmatism. Having witnessed the clinical deconstruction of their parents' lives, they are entering their own young adulthood with a vastly different set of priorities. Data from 2026 youth surveys shows that children of the Great Suburban Split are more likely to prioritize career flexibility and emotional intelligence over the acquisition of high-status suburban property. Leo is looking at universities not just for their prestige, but for their proximity to diverse social networks that don't rely on the couple's culture of his childhood. Maya, despite her high-performance gymnastics background, has developed a keen interest in community psychology, driven by her own experience of the two-house trauma. They are the first generation of the post-suburban era, and they are building lives that are intentionally designed to be more modular and less brittle than the ones their parents built. Step by step, the American household is being redesigned. The comprehensive study of divorce in the American suburbs is not just a record of failure. It is a blueprint for a new type of resilience. We have seen how the legal battlefield weaponizes data, how the economics of the split erode wealth, and how the social landscape of the cul-de-sac isolates the individual. But we have also seen the emergence of new tools, from forensic audits to collaborative mediation, that allow for a more rational transition. The Davis family, in their separate lives, has found a form of peace that was impossible within the performance of the perfect marriage. Mark has found a community in his urban suburban hub, and Sarah has reclaimed her professional identity without the weight of the suburban brand holding her back. The story of the American suburb is not over. It is simply being rewritten. The white picket fence is no longer a symbol of security, but a relic of a time when we believed that isolation was the same as safety. As we move into the latter half of the 2020s, the goal is no longer to build a fortress that cannot be broken, but to build a life that can be adapted. The masterclass on suburban divorce concludes with this realization. The most successful families of the future will not be the ones who never face conflict, but the ones who have the infrastructure, both emotional and financial, to survive the change. As the sun sets over the manicured lawns of the 2026 suburbs, we see the glow of thousands of smart homes, each one a laboratory of human experience. Some are thriving, some are fracturing, and many are being reset to factory settings. The question for you as you look at your own cul-de-sac is whether you are building a legacy or an overhead. The study of the Davis family is a warning, a guide, and a mirror. But what happens when the very definition of a family undergoes its next radical shift? As we look beyond the 2020s, a new movement is forming in the rural outskirts of the major hubs, the digital homestead movement. Is this the true successor to the suburban dream, or just another high-stakes experiment waiting for its own forensic audit? The data is already starting to roll in, and the next deep dive into the changing face of the American dream is just over the horizon.